Okay, so everybody, we are talking about the endocrine system and endocrine disorders. So, in last class, we talked about the pituitary gland, pituitary hormones, right? We talked about the thyroid gland, thyroid hormones, and thyroid disorders or diseases. We talked about the pancreas. Now, today, we'll talk about a couple other important endocrine glands. In your brain, you have three important glands that I mentioned in last class. In the brain, you have hypothalamus, right? You have the pituitary gland, and pineal gland. Okay. We have talked about the hypothalamus, which regulates the pituitary gland, and pituitary gland regulates the other glands of the body. That's why pituitary is called the master gland. Pituitary is the master gland, and we talked about anterior and posterior pituitary hormones. The pituitary is like this. This is the pituitary gland. It has anterior lobe and posterior lobe. From anterior lobe, we get 6 hormones, and from posterior, we get 2 hormones. We talked about this in last class. And above the pituitary, you have the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, right? And pituitary secretion is controlled by the hypothalamus. Now, pineal gland is responsible for synthesis of melatonin, a chemical, and this chemical regulates the sleep awakeness cycle, day-night cycle, which is called circadian rhythm. So, regulation of circadian rhythms. Okay, so pineal gland is responsible for the production of what? Melatonin. Okay, this chemical. And this chemical is very important for the regulation of sleep awakeness cycle in your body, right? You know, 12 hour, you sleep at night, stay awake at the daytime, right? During the day. So, that is a very important function of the pineal gland, and that cycle is called the circadian rhythms. Now, if that cycle is lost, then the person suffers from multiple complications. For example, there is a condition that is called SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Okay, SAD. what is this? This is interesting. Like, you know, the people live in the countries where during the long winter, almost no sunlight. Like, you know, in northern part of Canada, right? This long winter, people get, you know, monotonous, no sun, right? Day after day, it's dull. And they suffer from what? Depression. You see many people in Canada during the winter, they suffer from depression, right? And because of that lack of daylight, that depression occurs because the melatonin synthesis increases. And that clinical condition, that depression, is called seasonal affective disorder. Now, one thing you need to know, this is interesting, that when the light is present, in presence of light, the synthesis of melatonin decreases. This is interesting. The light stimulus decreases the synthesis of melatonin. And in darkness, the melatonin synthesis increases. Okay? And when melatonin production increases, you feel what? Sleepy. You feel sleepy. Makes sense? So in darkness stimulates the production of what? Melatonin, right? And you feel sleepy at night. Okay? And light stimulus decreases the synthesis of melatonin, and that's why you feel, you know, awakeness, not sleep. Okay. So that is an important gland. Another condition, you know, that is called jet lag. Jet lag occurs due to also the irregular production or secretion of melatonin. Like when you stay inside the aeroplane for many hours, right? Long travel, your day-night cycle is not maintained. So the melatonin secretion becomes irregular. Your pineal gland doesn't know when to secrete melatonin, right? So after that you feel sleepy, and that happens in jet lag. Few days it takes, you know, to get back to normal. Okay, so that is the pineal gland. Now we talked about thyroid gland. Thyroid gland produces, I mentioned in last class, T3, T4 and calcitonin. Okay, calcitonin. T3 and T4 are responsible for metabolism. Okay, T3 and T4 are related to metabolic activities of the body. More T3 and T4 means more metabolism. Okay? And that's why in hyperthyroidism, your metabolic activities increase, right? When your thyroid gland secretes more T3 and T4, right? That is hyperthyroidism. Is it clear? So always you have high metabolic activities in the body, right? So your heart rate goes, when metabolism increases, heart rate goes up, right? Tachycardia. Your body temperature is slightly higher, right? Because metabolism produces heat. So if you touch that person's body, you'll feel a little bit warmer. Make sense? Prolonged hyperthyroidism, if it continues, if you don't get the treatment, then the person will become what? Will lose weight. Because more metabolism, more fats are being used up, right? So you will lose the body weight, right? Sleeplessness. The person will have difficulty in sleep, and irritability I mentioned in last class, right? If you don't sleep, then you will get what? Cranky, right? Irritable. Always, you are disturbed by everything. So those are the symptoms of hyperthyroidism, right? That is related to what? T3 and T4. Now, calcitonin is responsible for lowering the calcium in the blood. So, different function. This hormone, although comes from the thyroid gland, it has a different function. Now, parathyroid gland. Parathyroid glands are 4 to 8 in number. Attached to the back of the thyroid. This is the thyroid gland, 2 lateral lobes connected by isthmus, I mentioned in last class. If you look the dorsal surface, back of the thyroid, you will see tiny glands. The number is not fixed, it varies person to person. 4 to 8 tiny glands attached to the back of the thyroid. Is it clear? Okay. But parathyroid glands are very important. Why? Because parathyroids produce a hormone that is called PTH, parathyroid hormone. PTH. And this one does what? Increases the calcium in the blood. So you see, thyroid hormone calcitonin lowers the calcium in the blood. Parathyroid hormone PTH does what? Increases. So opposite, right? Opposite action. By the action of these two hormones, your blood calcium concentration is maintained. Makes sense, right? So if calcium tends to go up, which one should be released? Calcitonin to lower it. Make sense? If blood calcium drops, goes down, then which one should be released? PTH to increase. Make sense? Is it clear? So by the action of these two, your blood calcium concentration is regulated or maintained. Now, what is the concentration of your blood calcium? The calcium concentration is between 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter of blood. And it must be within this narrow range, calcium in the blood, 9 to 11 milligram. If it goes below 9, that is called what? Hypocalcemia. Hypo means less, calcemia, which is dangerous. Hypocalcemia is what? Dangerous. Because calcium ion is very important in your blood. If the calcium concentration goes a little bit below normal, it can cause serious consequences.
9 to 11 milligrams of what? I can't read.
Per deciliter, DL.
Okay.
Deciliter, that means 100 milliliter. 1 liter, how many milliliter? Milliliter? 1 liter equals to?
What?
How many milliliter makes 1 liter? 1,000. Very good, 1,000, right? So deciliter means 1/10 of a liter. That means what? 100, right? 1/10 of 1,000 is what? 100. You know that. So 1 deciliter means 100 milliliter. That's 1/10 of a liter. Is it clear? So you can use either. Okay. It's a difficult math, right? It's not a difficult math. Deciliter is 1/10 of a liter. That means 100 milliliter, 100 milliliter. Okay, so now if it is below 9, that is hypocalcemia, right? And I said it is what? Dangerous, because it can cause serious consequences. One is paralysis of the muscles. And you know that your respiratory muscles are very important, right? If the respiratory muscles are paralyzed, doesn't work, then you will have what? Breathing problem, and even may stop, breathing may be stopped, and the person may die if you don't give calcium therapy. Make sense? So hypocalcemia will cause paralysis, and respiratory paralysis is particularly problematic. Calcium is very important for nerve signal transmission of nerve signal. Calcium is very important for blood clot formation. So if someone has someone has low calcium in the blood clot will not be formed easily. So that will increase the bleeding time. So calcium plays a number of important functions, just know that. Hypercalcemia. If the calcium concentration is more than normal, then that is called hypercalcemia, and that is also problematic because hypercalcemia can cause tetany, that means convulsion, of the muscles, epileptic type disorder. So that is also problem. So calcium is very important. Okay, just know that. And these two hormones help to regulate the calcium in the blood. Okay. Now another gland that is called the adrenal gland, sitting on the kidney. So this is the adrenal gland, this is the kidney. So it's like a cap of the kidney. On the upper pole of the kidney, this gland is sitting on the kidney. And this is the adrenal gland, very important gland. Adrenal gland. So you have two kidneys, therefore you have two adrenal glands. Now, adrenal gland is also called suprarenal gland, because supra is above, renal is kidney. Now, if I cut the adrenal gland and see inside, I'll see clearly two areas or regions. Outer part is called the cortex, adrenal cortex, and inner part is called the adrenal medulla. Okay? So outer cortex, inner medulla. Now, the cortex has 3 layers in it. So outer cortex has 3 layers. Okay, so you see here, outer part is the cortex, inner part is the medulla. Now I said that the cortex has 3 layers in it. You need to know those 3 layers. Okay? Outermost layer of the cortex is called zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa. That's the outermost. And then the middle layer middle layer is called zona fasciculata. Zona fasciculata. And innermost layer of the cortex, remember we are talking about the cortex, innermost layer is called zona reticularis. So those are three layers of the cortex. Adrenal cortex. Those three layers act as three separate glands. Those three layers work as three separate glands because they produce three totally different types of hormones. Make sense? So three layers produce three different types of hormones. That's why we can consider them as three separate glands. Now, zona glomerulosa produces a hormone. Zona glomerulosa produces the hormones. Those are called mineralocorticoids. Mineralocorticoids. The hormones produced by zona glomerulosa are called mineralocorticoids. The hormones produced by zona fasciculata, the middle layer, are called glucocorticoids. And the innermost zona reticularis produces the hormones called sex hormones. Okay, so you see, three layers produce three different types of hormones. Now, if I ask you, by looking at the names, tell me which hormones regulate the minerals in your body? Number one, right? Mineralocorticoids. Its name is telling you mineralocorticoids. Why cortex, cortical hormone. Makes sense? So, regulates the minerals like sodium, potassium, right? Chloride. Those are the minerals. So, those are regulated by mineralocorticoids. Just remember, the most important mineralocorticoid, the most important one is called aldosterone. Most powerful and important one is called aldosterone. That regulates the sodium and potassium in the blood. Okay. Glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids, first when the scientists named these glucocorticoids, they found that glucocorticoids help in glucose metabolism. That's why they named it glucocorticoids. Make sense? But later, they found that this hormone has a very powerful, strong action. What action is that? Anti-inflammatory. Strong anti-inflammation. That means what? It heals the inflammation very strongly, quickly. Make sense? Now, did you hear the name of ointment called hydrocortisone? No, it could be different name, but if you see the actual name, pharmaceutical name. It's called hydrocortisone, right? 1%, 2% hydrocortisone. You buy that ointment, right? And put when you get inflammation, or put the drop in the eye when you get red eye, right? It immediately inflammation goes away, right? It's very strong, you know. Only 1% or 2%, right? You see pretty clear action, right? So that is actually glucocorticoid. Cortisol, hydrocortisone, all those are what? Glucocorticoids. Make sense? So, you know, strong anti-inflammatory. But when we first identified, we found that it has strong glucose metabolic activities. But later, this one, we found that is strong anti-inflammatory. So hydrocortisone, cortisone, those are the drugs come from cortisol. Strong anti-inflammatory, inflammation, okay, action. Okay, now sex hormones, we know that sex hormones are mainly produced by the gonads, testes and ovaries, but also zona reticularis, that innermost layer of the adrenal cortex, produce sex hormones. Okay, so those are 3 layers and produce 3 different types of hormones, and they have different actions. That's why we say adrenal cortex is 3 glands within one. Now let's see the medulla, innermost part. Adrenal medulla has sympathetic neurons. You know, sympathetic, parasympathetic, autonomic nervous system, sympathetic type neurons, and these neurons produce adrenaline and noradrenaline. Very similar action. These two, adrenaline and noradrenaline, these are the hormones, come from the adrenal medulla, together called catecholamines. Catecholamines are adrenaline, noradrenaline, but just know these two. Now, have you heard adrenaline before? Many of you, right? You sometimes will see the DVD box. It says, this movie has a lot of what? Suspense, drama, right? It will release your adrenaline or increase your adrenaline pump, right? Something like that, you'll see adrenaline. So that means what? Excitement, right? This hormone, adrenaline, increases what? Excitement in the body. And that is called fight or flight response. Okay, fight or flight response. So, adrenaline secretion increases when you are excited. Other way, we can say adrenaline, if I inject adrenaline, right, or induce adrenaline, your body excitement will increase. Okay, so this hormone increases the blood pressure, increases the muscle tone, increases the respiratory rate. Okay, all those actions to make you hyperactive. Okay, so that's the adrenal gland. So you see that inside the adrenal gland, you have actually 4 different glands. 3 in the cortex and 1 is the medulla. And they produce different types of hormones. Now, hyperadrenalism. Hyperadrenalism. It's like hyperthyroidism. If adrenal function is more than normal, that is called what? Hyperadrenalism. And now you can think that in hyperadrenalism, the symptoms will be simple or complicated. What do you think? If adrenal gland functions more, overfunction, the symptoms will be complicated or simple? Because it is actually 4 glands, right, within one. So if different types of hormones are released too much, right, then you will have more complicated symptoms in the body, right? So hyperadrenalism is therefore complicated, and you need to know which hormone is being secreted more, all of them or particular one, right? So you have to determine that. Anyway, so prolonged hyperadrenalism can cause a clinical condition. It is pretty common. That is called Cushing Syndrome. That's why we say syndrome. Syndrome is not a simple, symptom. Complicated multiple symptoms together called syndrome. Okay, it's not like specific symptoms. It's just more complicated. That's why we use the term what? Syndrome. Okay, so now Cushing syndrome is a common complication of hyperadrenalism. The signs of Cushing syndrome, by looking at the patient, you can tell this person has hyperadrenalism or Cushing syndrome, because the signs are pretty clear. Some of those signs are moon face. The person's face will become what? Round. After the person gets that, Cushing syndrome, you will see the face becomes round. Okay, you won't be able to tell that this is the person you saw before, because fat accumulates, okay, in the face, becomes round. Buffalo hump. In the back of the buffalo, you see the hump, the elevation. Why that happens? Because pad of fat, a lot of fat, thick pad of fat is produced on the shoulder, in the shoulder area, as well as in the back of the neck, and supraclavicular, above the clavicle. So basically in the back of the neck and in the neck area, shoulder area, you will see a lot of accumulation of what? Fat. And that's why the back looks like hump. Okay? Buffalo hump. Another is commonly we see acne, the spots in the skin. Hypertension, high blood pressure. Okay. Another thing happens commonly, hyperglycemia. Glucose is always high. Hyperglycemia. Okay. Because we know that cortisol, that glucocorticoid, increases the glucose in the blood. Okay. So those are some common symptoms of Cushing syndrome, which is actually a result of prolonged hyperadrenalism. Now, the condition called hypoadrenalism, it's opposite of this. So let's now see hypoadrenalism. 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 If the function of the adrenal gland is lower than normal, that is hypoadrenalism, and that leads to a clinical condition that is called Addison's disease. Addison's disease. So, prolonged hypoadrenalism will cause Addison's disease, and it is like kind of opposite of Cushing syndrome, and the symptoms include hypotension. In hyperadrenalism, hypertension in Cushing syndrome, but in Addison's disease, since it is opposite, hypotension, low blood pressure, and particularly when we see the blood pressure drops when the person changes the body position, like he was, sitting. Now, when the person stands, suddenly blood pressure drops. Make sense? This is called postural hypotension. Postural hypotension, also called orthostatic hypotension. So, hypotension, when the person changes the body position from lying to sitting or sitting to standing, the blood pressure changes, drops. Hypoglycemia is opposite. These are opposite of Cushing syndrome. Blood sugar is low. Fatigue. The person will get tired easily. Some patients all the time feels tired. Another is loss of body weight. Loss of body weight. Abdominal cramp. The abdominal cramp. That causes pain. Abdominal pain. Okay. So those are some symptoms of Addison's disease. Okay, that is a result of prolonged hypoadrenalism. Okay, lack of function of the adrenal gland. I believe I talked about the pancreas. Just know that inside the pancreas has the head part like this. This is the head, body, and tail. Okay. Now, inside the pancreas, you have the duct tube that gets out and releases the pancreatic juice. Pancreatic juice. And pancreatic juice has amylase, lipase, and protease. Amylase helps in digestion of carbohydrates, starch, lipase, lipids, and protease, proteins. Lipase, lipid, protease, proteins. So you see that in pancreatic juice you have all digestive enzymes. Amylase, right? Lipase, protease for carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. So therefore, it is very important. And the pancreatic juice is secreted into the duct, and the duct takes the pancreatic juice to the outside. So this is endocrine or exocrine? What do you think? Remember, I mentioned the differences between endocrine and exocrine. So if there is a duct, and that duct takes the chemical just to the outside, what do you think? What do you think? Which one is ductless and which one has duct? The first thing I said, the differences between exocrine has duct, right? And endocrine is ductless. So I showed you this is a duct called pancreatic duct. Pancreatic duct. So that duct takes the pancreatic juice to the outside. This juice will go to the duodenum. You have duodenum here, you see? Small intestine. So it will go into the small intestine. Makes sense, right? Should go to the intestine to digest the food. Is it clear? So pancreas will release the pancreatic juice into the pancreatic duct, and the duct will take it to the duodenum, small intestine. Make sense? Where you have the food stuff. Okay, good. So that is endocrine or exocrine function? Exocrine function. Is it clear? Because duct. Now, pancreas, inside the pancreas, you have some structures like this throughout the pancreas. And these structures are called pancreatic islets. And these structures are actually endocrine structures, not exocrine. Why? Because the pancreatic islets secrete the hormones directly into the blood here, not into this duct. So these pancreatic islets do what? Secrete the or release the hormones into the capillaries, blood capillaries. Now you tell me, which type of gland secretes the hormones into the blood, not into the ducts? Endocrine or exocrine? Endocrine, right? So pancreatic islets are what? Endocrine structures inside the pancreas. Make sense? That's why they are secreting into the blood. So now you see that pancreas has both exocrine and endocrine functions. That's why pancreas is a mixed type gland. Make sense? It has both exocrine and endocrine parts. Now, which hormones are produced by the pancreatic islets or endocrine parts of pancreas? Two hormones, insulin and glucagon. Make sense? So these two hormones come from the endocrine part. That means from the pancreatic islets. Insulin does what? Lowers or increase blood sugar? Lowers, right? That's why diabetic patients take insulin, to lower the blood sugar. We all know that. Glucagon does just opposite, increases the blood sugar. So insulin lowers the blood sugar. We all know that. And glucagon increases the blood sugar. And by the action of these two, our blood sugar is controlled. It's like, calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, PTH, calcium, right? Similarly, insulin and glucagon, they come from the endocrine part of the pancreas, which is the pancreatic islets, and work on the blood sugar. Now, you can easily tell if the pancreatic islets are destroyed, then the production of insulin and glucagon will be less, right? Will be less. Now, one thing you need to know, inside the pancreatic islets, you have alpha cells and beta cells. Two types of cells are inside the pancreatic islets, alpha and beta. Alpha cells produce glucagon, and pancreatic beta cells produce what?